pecuniary interest in that, so.
Yeah.
Or I do. I can butter up all those who control my employment. You know, as the case may be.
There you go.
Okay, so we are on the live stream, and I'll just start the recording now. Laptop, camera 3, podium. Mr. Mayor, I believe we are all set to go.
Okay. Away we go. Good evening, council, senior leadership team. I see we have quorum, so I will call into session this regular council meeting on Monday, February 1st, 2021 at 5:30 p.m. Approval of agenda, Madam Clerk.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Moved by Councillor Hildebrand, seconded by Councillor Kaur. Be it resolved that the agenda for the February 1st regular meeting of council be adopted. So if you'd like to call for any changes to the agenda, Mr. Mayor?
Any changes to the agenda? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk.
Thank you. I'll call the vote starting with Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, that motion is carried.
Okay. The next on the agenda is disclosure of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof. After viewing our agenda, does any councillor have a pecuniary interest to declare? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Before we continue on, just a couple of shout outs. One shout out and an announcement. The fabulous Fenwick Lions, in partnership with area businesses and the town of Pelham, have once again started to deliver food and medicine to the town's shut-ins. The businesses involved with the program are Shoppers Drug Mart, Sobeys, Pelham Cares, and Pharma Choice. Also, February 1st, February is the Black History Month in Canada. And of course, the region has a very famous person in the past performance of a Harriet Tubman, who brought slaves up from through Pennsylvania and New York State and brought them into Canada, specifically St. Catharines, where they could live free lives. It's an astounding when you think of doing that, going through the backwoods of that country, and bringing the slaves up into Canada. Quite an accomplishment for this lady. And she does have a statue of her at 84 Henry Street in St. Catharines. All right, there we go. Back to the agenda. Presentations. We have a COVID update, Community Emergency Management Coordinator, our own Fire Chief, Chief Limburner. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors, SLT, and the members of the viewing audience. Just a few updates here on our COVID situation. Pelham has had a total number of cases of 261. We currently have 31 active cases within the town. Across the region, we've had a total of 7,941 cases. Of those, 1,119 are active. They've resolved 6,506, and our total number of fatalities has been 316 to date. Ontario, total cases 270,180, total resolved 244,939, total deaths 6,224. Across the province, our hospital admissions, we currently have 1,158 patients. Out of those in the ICU, 354, and out of those, 260 are on ventilators. Across the country, we're at 781,930 total cases, with total death count of 20,103. So unfortunately, that milestone was reached the last couple of days where we broke the 20,000 mark. In Niagara, our case doubling time has increased from my last report to 62 days. Our reproduction rate is 0.9. Positivity rate is 4.8. Public health is currently working with 43 active outbreaks. They've resolved 161 of them. As far as infection goes across the region, 56.1% have been close contact. Unknown has continued to grow at 30.2%, community spread at 10.8%, and travel 2.9%. Public health has administered to date 4,365 vaccinations. As far as regional enforcement, this is week ending January 30th. There has been 66 inspections. 42 of those were proactive, 24 were complaint driven. 4 warnings were issued, 5 citations were issued. The province was talking today about opening in-class learning, possibly by February the 10th. No word on that, final word on that, but they're looking at the hotspots possibly opening on those dates. And one other note, the mandatory testing is now in place for all persons arriving in Canada and any of our 4 major points. You have to be tested. If you refuse a test, you'll be fined. If you're during that test, you are isolated for 3 days until you get your results. If you're positive, then you're isolated for 14 days in a government facilities. If not, you're sent home to isolate. And that's the end of my report. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Chief. Any councillor have a question on these reports? Not seen any. I guess my only comment to the Chief is this morning you more or less gave us the disheartening news that the NHS is either out of, and maybe you can clarify that, either out of vaccines or they're going to be out in the next day or two. And unfortunately, we will not be getting any more until I believe it's the second week. Could you clarify that, please, Chief?
There's basically 2 groups that are administering vaccines. It's the NHS, which is our Niagara Health System at the hospitals, and then our public health. Public health is administering in long-term care and those types of facilities. And the amount of vaccines has been reduced fairly well through administration and through supply. The reports we got this morning is that they will not be getting inventories replenished until probably the second week in February. There are some vaccinations still there, but they're going to be reserved for the second administration to our seniors. So right now we're waiting for more shipments.
Okay, thank you, Chief. It was great that we made the decision to look after our senior homes and long-term care facilities first, obviously. Thank you for that, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Moved by Councillor Stewart, seconded by Councillor Olson. Be it resolved that Council received the COVID-19 update presentation from B. Limburner, Fire Chief and Community Emergency Management Coordinator for information. Hearing no further questions, Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, through you, that motion carries.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the report from our CAO, David Cribbs. Mr. Cribbs, you have the floor.
Good evening, Council. I have 2 items to bring to your attention this evening, if I may. The first is a report from the area municipalities, and in response to growing public demand, there seems to be a consensus forming around, I think, a very real need to take some concrete steps to recognize and have a way to reflect on the illness and death that we've experienced here in Niagara during the pandemic. As the Chief indicated, the most recent count from this morning is that 316 residents have died over the course of this pandemic. To recognize that, but knowing that we still have to continue isolation and social distancing, a number of municipalities are looking at lowering their flags to half-mast for a period of time to have an obvious symbolic demonstration and recognition of what we're all experiencing. To that end, a number of our neighbors are considering or have made the decision to react slightly differently. I'd like to inform you that the City of Niagara Falls lowered its flag for a week, January 14 to 21, and also changed the lights on the falls for that week. The City of Thorold hasn't yet arrived at any decision on how it's going to proceed, and I couldn't get information from Grimsby. I can indicate that Port Colborne is going to lower its flag for 3 days in March, the 12th, 13th, and 14th, which are essentially, and that is essentially the 1-year anniversary of the declaration of the emergency / the immediate sort of shutdown when from a year ago, as you'll recall, during the March break. So that's Port Colborne's path forward. Wainfleet hasn't yet arrived at a decision, but is considering a similar sort of 12, 13, 14. The town of Fort Erie is lowering its flag to half-mast every Monday between now and March 8th. The town of Lincoln has decided to lower its flag to half-mast for an entire month. St. Catharines has not yet arrived at its decision, but I understand at least the administration is leaning towards 12, 13, and 14th of March. Niagara on the Lake has had its flag down at half-mast, I understand, since April of last year, and the City of Welland has decided to do so for a week. And I think the week has started, and if I'm wrong, it's just about to. At any rate, it's the administration's advice that probably the most appropriate is March 12, 13, and 14 to coincide with the 1-year anniversary. It's an anniversary is something I think everyone can sort of identify with. I think everyone remembers where they were and what they were doing as we entered our first shutdown, and it was a seminal moment in a lot of lives. So that seems entirely appropriate, but I bring that to because ultimately I think it's entirely appropriate for council to make a decision. If you're content with the 12th, 13th, 14th, you could either have a vote on that or you need not do so, and staff will simply lower the flag to half-mast for those days. If you prefer any of the other options I've just mentioned, then I'd encourage you to have a discussion amongst yourselves and then a vote. There are obviously a number of options. There's no specific law in play. It really comes down to what you think would accurately and adequately reflect the thoughts, feelings, and needs of our residents. I can tell you there's some sort of behind the scenes conversation about maybe doing something closer to a larger display at the regional headquarters, so there'd be a place for people to put flowers or lay wreaths or whatever's appropriate, because it's really the centerpiece for the whole region. But so the town, we're not suggesting more than taking our flags to half-mast. I think if there's going to be some sort of physical thing, it would be appropriate at regional headquarters. But with that, I certainly like to yield my time to any member of council who has any commentary to offer or wishes to bring a motion, as the case may be.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Any comments at this time on the CEO's report? As he indicated, we can let him know by email at a later time. Councillor Wink.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion and support the recommendation by staff to lower our flags at half-mast on March 12th, 13th, and 14th in consideration of all those people who have passed from COVID. So thank you for bringing that forward, Mr. Cripps.
Okay, and Councillor Olson, are you seconding?
I will second the motion, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. Madam Clerk?
Thank you. Is there any discussion on the motion before I call the vote?
Any discussion on the motion put forward by Councillor Wink? Not seen any, Madam Clerk?
Okay, so I'm going to take the vote in the order I'm seeing members of council on my screen, starting with Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
And Mayor Duncan.
Yes.
That motion carries.
And Mr. CAO, did that conclude your comments?
No, there was one other item. COVID is certainly, if people didn't understand the importance of the public library system prior to COVID, the dramatic use and increase in use of online cultural resources and educational resources offered by the library system have really come to the fore in the community recently. And the library system made an announcement this afternoon. It issued a joint press release with the town of Lincoln that they were going to explore potential merger opportunities up to and possibly including forming a union board. You can find the text of that document on the library's website if you're so inclined. Both the town of Lincoln and the town of Pelham, of course, pursuant to your earlier instructions, are involved in or will be involved in said discussions, exploratory conversations, and or negotiations, as the case may be, and they will be represented directly by my office. So that's become news as of today, and certainly an appropriate time when library use is certainly, particularly the electronic library use, is at sort of staggeringly high numbers.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. Any comments on the CAO's first or second announcements? Not seen any. I know that it was a wish of this council for the Pelham Library to seek out opportunities of partnership. And on behalf of council, I thank the Pelham Library Board for going down that road and seeking a partnership with Lincoln. Madam Clerk.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Wink, seconded by Councillor Hahn. Be it resolved that council receive the COVID-19 update presentation from D. Cribbs, Chief Administrative Officer, for information. If there are no further questions, we'll start the vote with Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
And Mayor Duncan.
Yes.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the motion carries.
Okay. Next on the agenda is delegations, and our first presenter is Chairman of the Cannabis Control Committee, Tim Nohera. Tim, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You got the floor.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. So I'm here before you this evening. It's been a little over 3 months, and I'm here to give you an update on the work of the Cannabis Control Committee for the past few months and what we see in the immediate horizon so that you can anticipate what's coming. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I'll speak to 2 points. One is just to give you an update on what's transpired since my last update to council on November 2nd. That'll be the first part, and then the second part will focus specifically on the odorous industries nuisance bylaw and the steps needed to complete its implementation. Next slide. Thank you. So in terms of an update, since November the 2nd, the committee has met 3 times, on the 25th of November, the 16th of December, and earlier in January on the 20th. We've been researching, as you know, the light bylaw is one of our items on our agenda. We've been researching approaches for quantifying sky glow for that light bylaw with a view towards avoiding unintended consequences with our local flora and vegetable greenhouses whose operations are not causing adverse effects in our town. We've had the opportunity of visiting CanTrust, and one of our members, along with bylaw enforcement and along with Phil Gerard, who is our odor expert retained by the tower, had the opportunity to get a thorough presentation and walkthrough at CanTrust regarding odor mitigation. We've been trying to arrange a similar walkthrough with Redecan, but they haven't been forthcoming. The Ambient Odor Monitoring Program, that's something we'll speak about, and we've been providing feedback on its design to our odor consultant, to Mr. Phil Gerard, who's with PG Compliance Management Inc., and again, who is supporting the town in the design of the AOMP, the Ambient Odor Monitoring Program. You may recall it's about a year ago that actually in March that we approved the bylaw, and the Ambient Odor Monitoring Program is a key part of that bylaw that requires a specialist to design. The final AOMP design will be incorporated into a statement of work, and that statement of work with procurement materials prepared by the town will seek to compete and hire an environmental contractor who will carry out the Ambient Odor Monitoring Program. So that's it for my update in terms of sort of basically what's been going on in the background for the past 3 months. Next slide, please. So I'm going to pivot now and talk about the steps needed from where we are today to complete the implementation of the Odorous Industries Nuisance Bylaw. And I'll begin with a summary of the bylaw itself, which is what you find on this chart. We passed that bylaw on March 23rd of 2020, and it's a fairly involved bylaw, so it's not difficult to lose sight of what's included in it. And I've tried to simplify or summarize what's in the bylaw so that I can speak more easily towards what's left in the implementation of the bylaw. I'm going to walk through starting on the left and just start by saying that the bylaw applies, the odor nuisance bylaw applies to indoor and outdoor growers. So it doesn't matter whether you're in a greenhouse or whether you're growing your crop outdoors. It is applicable to designated growers as well as the larger licensed growers that we have in our town, the ones we're familiar with. And the bylaw applies to existing cannabis operations. When I use the word cannabis, it's really cannabis and industrial hemp. It's anything that's governed under the Cannabis Act, which includes both of those. So it applies to existing and it applies to new ones. The odorous industry, there's a definition of an odorous industrial facility, and that definition is important. It is any use of land, buildings, structures, or improvements used in connection with cannabis. So it's a broad definition of what's an odorous industrial facility. The crux of the bylaw, the odor nuisance bylaw, is really very simple. It's that no person shall operate an odorous industrial facility that causes an adverse effect. And the principle of adverse effect is well founded across jurisdictions, but especially in Ontario under the Environmental Protection Act, and that's one of the acts upon which our bylaw is based. So no person shall operate a facility that causes an adverse effect. Adverse effects, there are lengthy definitions in the bylaw on what's an adverse effect. Simply stated, if it causes somebody a discomfort or loss of enjoyment of at their property, that would be an adverse effect. There's other elements, but that's probably the most common and simplest if you have complaints. The producers, the operators must produce their licenses for inspection. They must notify the town promptly of any changes to their licenses. They have to operate in a suitable zone designated for such use. They have to employ air filtration systems to prevent the escape of obnoxious odors, which is a defined term, odors beyond their property that cause an adverse effect. On the right-hand side, I'm going to shift you over, but ignore for the moment the numerical items 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to come back to those. The next bullet is the bylaw requires the facilities to document and to report to the town all complaints received from neighbors. So if a facility gets a complaint from a neighbor, they're supposed to document that and inform the town, because complaints are sort of a key measure of adverse effects. Any facility over 50 square meters in size, it's about 450 square feet, shall pay for this program, the Neighborhood Ambient Odor Monitoring Program. So the program that our consultant is designing, that we will compete and which will be carried out by a contractor, has costs associated with it. They're not insignificant, and the costs will be shared among facilities over 50 square meters in size as per the bylaw. They're also required to prepare a contingency odor mitigation plan in accordance with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, with some standards, in particular an emission summary and dispersion modeling report. And the contingency odor mitigation plan, the idea there, just a bit of memory, recalling why this is here, is it involves a professional looking at the facility, the nature of the growing in the facility, how odor or filtration is done, and assessing what will be, through modeling, assessing what kind of odor is expected to emit from the facility, and then accounting for the odor mitigations for the air filtration systems that are employed at the facility. It then forecasts what you can expect in the vicinity of the facility. So that's another requirement. And the contingency part is, if you then end up having complaints, it talks about how you can improve your air filtration systems. It already considers that, so that you can mitigate those complaints. That's a contingency side of it. There are broad powers for entry and powers of inspection, and violating any provision in the bylaw will constitute an offense that you could be charged or fined for. So that kind of relate. Oh, sorry, we're not gone yet. Apologize. I'm going to go back to the 1, 2, and 3. So there's 3 other provisions in the bylaw, and these provisions. So while the bylaw is focused on adverse effects and complaints as measuring that, we can also measure using an olfactometer, a nose meter, a smell meter. We can also measure. So we have provisions in the bylaw that are intended to make it easier for our enforcement team and for the contractor who is conducting the ambient odor monitoring program. And that's that first number 1. That's the number 1 on the top right there is the element that really underpins the ambient odor monitoring program. And what they would do is they'll go around on a designed receptor grid, location grid, where people live in the vicinity of each facility, and they'll take random measurements using an odor meter, and random times of day and night, weekends, and they'll look for exceedances of odor level, and they'll register those, kind of like going around measuring the wind at different locations. You'll get an idea of how air disperses. Well, this is how the odor disperses through our town, which is quite challenging because of the hilly terrain that we live in here in Pelham. You see that with fog, where you see these variations of fog patches. That's a result of the way that the air and the temperature changes as a function of hills and valleys. So that first item relates to the design of the program, the ambient odor monitoring program. The next two, items 2 and 3, these are single point measurements that our own bylaw enforcement team can use. Item 2, they can show up to a complainant's house, a sensitive use, and they can take a measure. Item 3, they can show up to the property line of a facility and take a measure. So that's the summary of our odorous industries nuisance bylaw. Next slide, please. So the steps needed to fully implement this bylaw. The first step is we need to complete the design of the ambient odor monitoring program, which our odor consultant is well into. The second step is that the committee will bring recommendations. We anticipate this. We're giving you a heads up based on the work already done. We anticipate bringing some recommendations to council for some small amendments to the bylaw after step 1 is complete. That will address knowledge gained since we started the implementation and make for a better bylaw. That's step 2. Step 3, the town will establish a licensing framework so that we can charge. There are costs to charge the cannabis producers with this program. So there needs to be a mechanism for charging the cannabis industry those costs. There'll be annual costs, so the town will bring that framework forward. The fourth item is to compete, to prepare the RFP and compete for the selection of an environmental contractor to carry out that ambient odor monitoring program. Our odor specialist, Mr. Gerard, will assist in the oversight and evaluation, and again, the annual costs of that program will be determined by virtue of the competition process. So we'll know what the cost is going to be. We had great competition when we were hiring our odor expert. We have no reason to believe we're not going to see excellent competition for the environmental contractor, which should hopefully give us the most competitive costs for the program. The fifth item, we need to give the cannabis industry notice of when the ambient odor monitoring program will begin. The program conducted by the contractors, which will be, and the associated costs with that program that they'll be responsible for. And then once the program's underway, then the data from that program, the random measurements that will be conducted by the environmental contractor at different locations at different times, that data will be published regularly. It's meant for full transparency, so it'll be published to the public, to the cannabis producers simultaneously, and that'll give us a really good understanding of the odor situation and how it evolves over time, day, night, weekends. That information will then finally become available in accordance with the bylaw. So that's all I have in terms of the presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nora, for that complete and thorough update and steps to be taken. And I see Councillor Hildebrand has comments.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Being on the Cannabis Committee gives me an opportunity to know what some of these answers are. However, I thought it'd be useful for Council to be aware of the issues and the amount of time we spent talking about these things. So I basically have 3 questions for you, Tim. The first question has to do with regards to sky glow and the effect it has on the town, because the Council has discussed that. What is the issue with flora and vegetable greenhouses versus cannabis greenhouses? My second question has to do with page 4 of the slide deck, and that has to do with the ambient odor monitoring program. Do we have any idea what the cost of that program will be? And have the cannabis facilities prepared or provide us with our odor mitigation plan? And if so, what have we learned from them? So those are the three questions I have.
Can you remind me of the first one again, Councillor Hildebrand?
What is the issue with the flora and vegetable greenhouses versus cannabis?
Sure.
You know the discussion we had with our experts.
Sure. And the second one was costs, and the third one, just writing it down so I won't have to ask again. The third one again?
Oh, that was, have the cannabis facilities prepared and provide us with their odor mitigation plan?
Odor mitigation.
Or what have we learned?
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so flora and vegetable greenhouses. We have them in our town, and I apologize, I have a squeaky chair here that needs a little WD-40, so if I breathe the wrong way, you might hear it. We've learned through the research that we've been doing, and just through the passage of time, frankly, as other jurisdictions are dealing with light bylaws. For example, Norfolk Haldeman has had, you may have seen press, there's been a lot. We're becoming more aware of first of all, there's a challenge in defining sky glow. If we were only directing a bylaw at cannabis facilities, then it's easy to define. It's a cannabis facility that's causing sky glow. If you have to measure it in some way, then you have to get quantitative. So we've done a lot of research on how do you do that? How do you define quantitative sky glow? And what you learn is sky glow is a reflective process from the atmosphere. But the light intensity that is the source of the sky glow is indoors, and we can't measure that easily unless you're monitoring people in real time and collecting that data. In the course of other jurisdictions establishing such bylaws, the vegetable and flora industry has come under fire as sort of unintended consequences, at least from their perspective, because if you don't define the bylaw precisely, then if you make it very broad and simple language, then you have a big catch, and you catch more than maybe you intended. So the flora and vegetable industry has been on the receiving end of light bylaws that are poorly worded. And I'm not talking poorly in any legal drafting sense. It's more in the differences in how those operations grow and work and generate light. As a result of that, we've had a letter from one of their associations, Flowers, Ontario Flowers Canada, and the industry has been meeting, and we've been notified that the industry, the floral and vegetable industry, are going to really take a hard response to light bylaws. They're going to be actively engaged because they don't want to, they are subject to different rules and regulations than cannabis. For example, cannabis is regulated by the Cannabis Act, and people who grow food, vegetables and the like, they're subject to, I don't even know the name of the act, Food Inspection and Production Act. So they have different normal practices for how you grow food versus how you grow cannabis. And so they have things they're allowed to do in the vegetable and flora industry as a normal farm practice that are not normal farm practices for cannabis. So that's about as simple as I can make the issue right now. There are differences, and we have to take our time looking at how we define sky glow so that we don't end up inadvertently. You know, it's one thing when you do your work and you say, we know we're going to be challenged, and you get your advice and defensibility, but it's another thing when you just rush and you didn't anticipate the issues, and then you have to deal with them after the fact. So we're now aware, and we're slowing down a little bit to do more work, more research to try and get it right.
Yeah, thank you. I knew it was complex, and I knew it was going to take more time than we originally thought.
Sure, and that's, if we're going to do a joint bylaw, then we have to be careful because, you know, we know what, some people think they know what they're looking at, but we have to write it in a way that is fair. And what's happened in Norfolk Haldeman is one municipality wrote it one way and they got it half right. The other municipality wrote it a different way, they got it half right, and they're all dealing with the matter right now. So we want to get ahead of that and do it hopefully right. The second question, the costs of the ambient odor monitoring program. It's hard to give a cost right now because we haven't competed it, but just based on, I've asked those questions of our consultants and of others. I've looked at other places where programs like this technique is used in odorous industries across Ontario. I'm going to take a wild guess, so I'll deny I ever said it, except it's recorded. But I think it's in it's 100K. It's annually. It's in the six-figure range annually. You know, is it 80K? Is it 110K? 120? I don't know, but I think it's in that ballpark in terms of cost. But again, we'll get a much better idea once the design is complete and once it's competed and we see how different environmental contractors bid. The third question was with respect to the requirement for the cannabis producers to prepare an odor mitigation plan and to provide that to the town. To my knowledge, we haven't received that from either of the cannabis producers, but in fairness to them, I don't believe we've asked for it yet. So that certainly is one of the items on the final list towards completely implementing the odorous industries nuisance bylaw. I think that's one we could move forward with quickly. It's straightforward. It's just asking for it.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. I guess I really wanted to highlight how serious these issues are and that there are costs associated and how the work is so critical to do it right the first time, or at least do every effort, take the necessary time that we need as a committee rather than rushing through trying to get something done. Thank you.
We thought we were closer than we were, and then we learned a bit more. So
I know. It seems as though this 1 or 2 years was going to be up a lot sooner.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cord, I saw your hand.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Tim. First of all, I'd like to thank you for your great presentation. And also, I'd like to take this time to thank you for all your hard work over the year to make Pelham a better place to live. The question I'm going to ask you is, has any other municipality reached out to you within the Niagara region? Like you mentioned before, that you don't want to have two different bylaws, or at least a consistent bylaw throughout the Niagara region. Because I did get some concerns about a grow op on, if I'm not mistaken, on Cataract Road in Welland.
sure. Thank you, first of all, Councillor Core, for the thank you. You're welcome. We've had interactions with different municipalities in the region informally. And I know our enforcement team probably receives complaints regarding that Cataract property from residents. The closest I would say we came to direct discussions with the region were when we were working through the regional approval of our official plan and zoning bylaw amendments, and we had several discussions and dialogue with our outside planner, myself, and with staff and the region, and had shared concerns about how we're going about it in Pelham and what some of the other issues are across the region. I would say probably that's the most formal venue we've had to actually talk at that level. There has been a roundtable, and members of the committee have attended that roundtable, and that specifically was geared towards looking at the regional differences. I'm sure our regional counselor here can speak to that. I have seen recently, very recently, a follow-up work done by the region as a result of that roundtable. And I know there were letters sent from the region on behalf of the municipalities to our provincial and maybe federal leaders. But I have seen very recently, last week, we provided comment, the committee and staff are providing comment back to the region on a follow-up study they did. So what the region has completed recently is they've looked at not only Pelham, but other municipalities in Niagara and then across Ontario. And they've built sort of a chart or matrix of comparators in approaches on addressing from a bylaw or official plan perspective from addressing the impacts of cannabis. So I'm not sure how they're going to use that sort of integrated view, Councillor Kaur, but I know it's prepared and they had asked for comments for accuracy, and we have just recently provided those, I think, a week ago.
Thank you, and great job.
Councillor Hahn?
Through the mayor, yes, thank you. So I'm just looking page 4 of your slide deck, Tim. It says no person shall operate an odorous industrial facility that causes an adverse effect. I'm just wondering, how does enforcement then know if adverse effects are caused by a particular facility? Is that then through the olfactory meter, like measuring it closest to the facility and taking measurements? How does that work?
Both methods. So first and foremost, I would say it's our PSR system. It's our complaint system. So adverse effects really deal with complaints, and the it's causing somebody loss of enjoyment. They're having a headache. They can't go out for a walk. And our odor expert has reaffirmed that. We knew that during our research. It's in the bylaw, but has reaffirmed that for us. So there's no doubt the our PSR system for collecting complaints from residents is front and center. In fact, I know I was looking through the agenda package, somewhere later in the agenda package, the chief has an annual for 2020, the annual report of the complaints related to cannabis odor. And if you look at his report, it's in your agenda package. You can see, since we really started trying to collect complaints as we're getting closer, and enforcement actually has some of those olfactometer tools, the nose meter, to be able to go out and take some measures, we are getting more complaints from residents. So first and foremost, we have to track those complaints and teach residents how to use the system. The system has its faults, and we've been putting forward recommendations on how to improve the system itself so that complaint data is good. So you've got complaint data now. You know you have problems, or they're increasing, they're decreasing. It's then the measurement data that you use with the third-party environmental contractor, as well as with enforcement. That data that you collect and organize regularly, that gives us, what that does is it allows us to translate adverse effects, complaints from people, to numbers that you can measure. So when you collect that data using a standard measurement methodology, you can then correlate over time. You can take that set of data you're getting with the nose meter at the same locations and time and look at your complaint data and say, we now know in the town of Pelham that if we register X on the odor meter when the winds are from the west relative to this facility, that's when our complaints go up. And so it's a twofold, they work together. And the data collection gives us some instant response. There's that item 2 and 3 allows you to register a threshold. And we frankly are learning from the work of enforcement on what those right thresholds are. And then the contractor data, which will be measuring regularly in a much more, in a more sophisticated way, if you will. That data is going to be shared with the town as well as with the oversight, so we get the proper understanding of how to bring it together. Great. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much. I do have one more question, though. Mr. Gerard, his odor monitoring program, then, when do you expect that to be completed? What's your time frame there?
That's a good question. So on our January 20th meeting, he presented an update to his program, and we spent most of our committee meeting reviewing and listening to him. There was plenty of lively discussion. The committee members, the volunteer committee members, we have further digested his he has some very specific recommendations to finish the ambient odor monitoring program. And I would say the committee members are in agreement with his recommendations, at least in principle. There are some concerns with staff that we are about to undertake discussions in. So my guess, I know our first meeting on that is next week. So I hope we have another committee meeting on the 17th, I think it is, of February. I'm hopeful we're going to know where we're at on the 17th of February, and then we can bring recommendations forward to council sometime thereafter.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks very much, Tim. Thanks for all your work.
You're welcome.
Okay, Councillor Stewart.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Nohera. Again, I will thank you and your committee for all your hard work you've been doing on behalf of the town. I have a couple of questions. We have, a couple of major producers here, but we also have people that have like individual licenses to grow for their medical needs. And I know, I'm not sure about our municipality, but I know in other ones, they will group the licenses and they will all grow in one place. So would this apply to them, provided that where they were growing was at least 50 square meters? And would they be charged part of the costs?
So the short answer, you asked two questions. I'm going to separate them for you. Will they be charged part of the costs? The bylaws were drafted with legal advice from Arid and Berlis so that they would apply to all license holders. I'm going to use that word broadly. That includes these designated growers, so that it would apply to them. How we exercise the bylaws, how we enforce them against designated growers, and I'll explain that in a minute, is a separate question, I would say. So I can certainly speak to, meaning there's plenty of discussion and debate about, who you would apply it to. So on the smaller scale level. So just a bit of information. We came up with the 50 square meters with care. And 50 square meters, nice rule of thumb is one plant is a square foot. So 450 or 500 square feet, your 50 square meters, that happens to be the maximum. 497 plants is the maximum number of prescription plants that the Cannabis Act will authorize to an individual for their own medical needs. It's a massive number of plants from a cannabis perspective. It's the 4 plant per person, which is your sort of charter right, where we're not regulating at all in any way, 4 plants per person. But under the Cannabis Act, a person can get a prescription from a doctor to grow up to 497, I believe that's the number, plants. If I can't grow that 497 plants for myself, think of that as taking up a 500 square foot or a 50 square meter area in a small little part of a greenhouse. If I can't do that for myself, I can designate one of you, if you like me, and if you're willing to grow for me, I can designate one of you to grow it on my behalf. Now there's process, and the licensing with the feds is pretty tight on this. They're secretive on who has done that. It's hard to get that data, and that's where there's a lot of political talk, because how do we know if the place next door is one of these designated growers or not? It's a separate political issue that everybody's looking at. But if they're a designated grower, they do fall under our rules. Both the Planning Act, the zoning bylaw, and the nuisance bylaw apply to them, and we need to determine how we apply it to them. The complexity, Councillor Stewart, arises because of concerns for things like charter challenges, and what I can tell you is that has changed, but none of us want to be the pioneers on that, I don't think. And then some gray areas between is it legal or not, where enforcement, where there are boundaries between what bylaw enforcement can do and what require police to deal with. So there's some jurisdictional complexities around that because of the lack of information that we have about who these designated growers are. We have identified that as, so while our bylaws and our official plan and zoning bylaw amendments apply, the committee has taken on designated growers this year, this calendar year, as one of our topics that we're going to put effort towards. Many municipalities are doing it because of the consequences they're having, the very negative consequences they're having with designated growers when they grow too much and they're growing illegally. So we are putting effort into that. The odor bylaws are our first priority in the light, but we are already in discussions and doing research, and later in the year, I'm hopeful I can bring some more information from the committee to council as we get a better understanding of what else we might be able to do.
Thank you. I've got another couple questions. Do you have any idea of the amendments you will anticipate to making to the bylaw? And if you have, and if so, if there's a timeline?
Sure. What I expect, again, based on a preliminary review of recommendations, I'm just pulling it up for, Madam Clerk, can you bring back the presentation, please, if you're able? Thank you. And it's just the previous slide. Thank you. So the bylaw has some numerical numbers in it, those items 1, 2, and 3. It has numerical thresholds. And those numerical thresholds were picked in part on the basis of standards and Environmental Protection Act, and they were picked in part on some educated guessing, literally, based on, again, we have to use the data to teach us how to correlate adverse effects with these numbers. So we're learning now, we've learned a lot, and I suspect there'll be very small changes to the bylaw and that they likely will relate to item 2 and 3, the 4 and 6 thresholds that are sitting there. So I suspect it'll be very simple recommended amendment to the bylaw, and it will likely, again, we need to get through this, but it would likely relate to those thresholds.
Thank you. And just one more quick question. What kind of assistance do you need us councillors to provide?
Council's been terrific. I don't think we need, thank you. I don't think we need anything at this time. I'm sure I will be coming back to you in the coming few weeks or so after we get our heads around the recommendations together. But I think, and there are items I know that, for example, with respect to licensing and other things that staff will do in the normal course, I don't have anything at this time that I require. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions from any councillor? Not seeing one. Tim, I have one perhaps. It's been a year, maybe perhaps not quite a year, since we spent the 6,500 or whatever on the nose ranger, I believe. And technology moving the way it does, if you buy a computer, it's out of date the next week. Is the nose ranger, has it, hopefully, and hopefully you're going to say this is not true, has the nose ranger become outdated, or is it still a preferred tool to do the job for us?
To my knowledge, it has not become outdated. It is based, the nice thing about the nasal ranger is it's really a mechanical dilution device where it's measuring the number of air exchanges to dilute the smell that you're smelling with your own nose. So to my knowledge, I haven't done an update. I wouldn't do it. I'd actually ask Phil to do it, Mr. Gerard, but to my knowledge, it should be just fine.
Okay, excellent. Good to hear that. Okay, any other questions? I ask again. I see none, and turn to the clerk.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Moved by Councillor Hildebrand, seconded by Councillor Corr. Be it resolved that Council receive the presentation from Tim Nohera, Chair of the Cannabis Control Committee, for information. And the vote starts with Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Corr.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, that motion carries.
Okay. Tim, before you go, again, on behalf of council, thank you and your committee for all the hours you put in to help us with this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good night, everybody. Be safe. Thank you.
Okay, Madam Clerk, Council, we now go to our second delegation for the night, and that is a report of on regional by our own regional councillor, Diana Hewson. Diana, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mary Junkin. Can everyone hear me okay?
I believe so.
Okay, I'll try to share my screen. Share. Oh, click share. There we go. Look good?
That's good.
All right. So hi, everyone. Okay, so just an overview of some of the things that I wanted to highlight for your attention, namely public health updates, the changes and the impact of what we changed with regards to our waste management programs, some changes with regards to the planning department. There's EMS changes coming through that I think even maybe our fire chief will be very interested in. The West Lincoln Hospital Memorial funding. There's some social justice updates. We recently passed the budget, and I just wanted to give you kind of an overview of some of the things that I've been up to. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was public health. I understand you're getting some great updates from both the CAO and the fire chief, so I certainly won't try to duplicate anything that they've been telling you, but as you're aware, I think we are definitely having some supply issues with regards to the vaccination, and this is across Canada. Public health had been advocating to take on a more active role in the vaccine distribution, which they have been granted. Luckily, so the provincial government seems to have listened, and they were actually engaged to deliver our vaccine distribution to our long-term care homes. They did that successfully over 9 days, which is quite impressive. You're continuing to have some staffing issues. Public health has been thrown into the limelight like never before. And, you know, 2 months ago, we had 182 active cases. Today, we have over 1,100 active cases, and to try and keep up with the contact tracing on, 182 cases is much different than contact tracing for over 1,000. So it's really had a big impact on staffing and trying to keep up with the needs of staffing for public health. We've also had, we're also creating a new position for an assistant medical officer of health, and that was included in our recent budget. And a significant aspect of those staff, again, which look after the contact tracing, is directly impacted by caseload. So the greater the caseload, the greater the strain. And I do want to mention, we also have a weekly update from the acting medical officer of health. It's an opportunity to get questions asked. If anyone has any questions that residents are posing to them, please pass it on to me. I'm happy to ask the acting medical officer in the meeting. And those meetings are also recorded and posted and available for viewing later. And I often post them on my Facebook page just for anyone who's interested in getting a bit more of a regular update in terms of what's happening with COVID and with Niagara's response. I will also mention what I didn't include here is there was a task, I did include it. There was a task force recently developed to help try and inform the community vaccination distribution response. And that task force was recently named last week. So that's another development. Waste management. So the region is trying to promote our new waste management service, which is trying to place a greater emphasis on recycling and organics. As you're aware, last October, we did move to a bi-weekly pickup service and also engaged with new service providers. We also developed a new app which provides the dates of the pickup as well as provides more clarity to our residents in terms of what goes where and tries to make it easier for people to understand what goes in the green bin versus blue bin versus versus garbage. I actually haven't had any complaints, so I'm very happy about that. I think it's been well received. Some municipalities have noted some current concerns with regards to illegal dumping. I haven't heard anything from Pelham. I think these are mostly, in the bigger cities, they're noticing some dumping in some of their garbage receptacles downtown, or there's been some dumping on some rural roads, but that seems to be more commercial as opposed to residential. And I did get some numbers today. So we're happy to report that our garbage tonnage is down by 7%. Our green bin collection is up 30%. And our recycling collection is up 9%. So that's just since we made the changes in October. And those are all great numbers because it means the intended effect of trying to get those numbers up in terms of that waste diversion. It's working, it seems to be effective. With regards to planning, there's still work on our new official plan. It's still underway. We're expecting that'll be completed by next June, and then each municipality will have to develop a secondary plan in response to that. We did have a local official plan amendment come forward from Welland, which borders with us. Welland had actually asked for the region to approve the amendment without providing any further approvals. So basically asking for the region to withdraw itself as an approval authority. Council wasn't very favorable to that. And as part of the motion to approve the work that they've done so far, I also asked the motion to be amended so that both our town and Thorold, who also borders on the amendment that they're looking for, are included in terms of any of the future work and kept in the loop on the project as it progresses. So I think that's important because there is interest to us in terms of how this progresses, because it will definitely tap into some infrastructure that is relevant to us. So we should be keeping an eye on it. There is also an approved climate change work plan, which had the intention of also developing a greening strategy. So I'm kind of excited to see how that unfolds and what that means for our natural heritage or the preservation of our tree canopy. I did include a map of the Northwest Welland expansion area, so just so you could have it for your reference. This is the area that I spoke to where the Welland was looking to exclude the region from having further approval, but that's not good. It's not going to proceed that way, and they'll still have to bring it back to us for approval. So I think that's a good thing. EMS services, and I think this will probably be relevance to our fire services. The region, in collaboration with the NRP and also St. Catharines Fire and Niagara Falls Fire, have been working on developing a plan for consolidating the delivery of our emergency dispatch services. This is a target that we must meet for March 31st, 2024, and it represents a consolidated emergency dispatch delivery that will be upgraded to a digital system. There's a estimated cost is around $2 million, and next steps will be to hire a consultant to assess how we proceed with the project. Social justice and good governance. As I mentioned previously in a previous report, we did join the Coalition of Inclusive Municipalities that affirmed our commitment to eradicate racism and discrimination, but it also to promote human rights and diversity. As a result, the region is forming 3 new committees: the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, the Anti-Racism Advisory Committee, and a 2SLGBTQIA Advisory Committee. So, and in addition to that, there was a motion put forward which passed in terms of developing a lobbyist registry, and we'll see. That's still to be developed, but it's a concept that's been approved, and we're waiting to see how that takes form moving into the near future. So the West Lincoln Memorial funding did come forward. There was a delegation that came forward asking for $14 million. I did think it was a controversial vote. Council had earlier, in advance of this meeting, had decided to develop a hospital funding policy. There was further direction on the policy approved in November, and staff worked quite hard to come up with a matrix throughout December. The funding policy, as well as the funding ask for the West Lincoln, came forward at the same time, and council basically turned down all of the policy work and awarded $12.6 million to the West Lincoln Memorial funding project. So despite the commitment of the $12.6 million, only $1.5 million was actually committed into our budget for this year as well in subsequent years. This does create a funding gap of about $6 million in 4 years when the funding becomes payable. So this is one of the reasons why I find this whole thing problematic. But in 4 years, we're going to have to come up with $6 million unless the region decides to somehow find it within the budget leading up to that deadline. And then on to the budget. So the budget, I will say that staff had successfully followed a 2% budget guidance, and there was quite a bit of COVID pressures, but we, like the town, had received a significant amount of funding to offset those pressures, as well as staff was quite successful in identifying some budget mitigation efforts, such as a salary gapping strategy, which I thought was quite clever. So this is just an overview of the budget. It did land at 2.9%, but if we're to look at strictly the Niagara Region department budget, it fell within the 2% guidance. And I've listed some of the pressures of the guidance, pressures that were impacted our budget to the left here. But it was actually, if you look at the agency boards and commissions, which pushed our budget up to the 2.9%, and it's primarily because of the police budget. I'm not sure if you recall, but in a previous presentation, the NRPS had come to the region looking for about 40 new officers. And this was because we've seen an escalation of calls and a real challenge in terms of officers responding to the number of calls and also keeping up with the time allotment that we've allocated to our 911 response. So the region decided to split the budget request for the 40 officers. 20 officers were put into last year's budget and 20 officers were put into this year's budget, which resulted in a 4.9% budget for the police budget, which drove the region's overall budget up to 2.9%. The Conservation Authority did also fall within the 2% guidelines, as well as Niagara Regional Housing. Niagara Courts, we saw a decrease in their revenue, and this is largely because court services have been significantly delayed because of COVID, but they've also allowed for some leniency in terms of paying fines, which have impacted their revenue. So because of that delay in terms of when those fines are due, we aren't seeing the money collected as quickly, and we all get a portion of the revenues from those fines. So that's just an overview of the ABCs. So, and what I wanted to bring to your attention is, although we landed on a 2.9% budget, there was an ask to, I'm going to say, arbitrarily assign a 1.8% budget by dipping into our taxpayer reserve fund. This resulted in $4.3 million being removed from that reserve fund. This brought the dollar value of the budget or the tax increase from roughly $46 per average assessed home to $29. So it's a $17 savings to the taxpayer. Realistically, I think homes in Pelham are probably assessed at twice this amount, so it's probably closer to a $34 savings for Pelham taxpayers. But it still goes to show what a difference, you know, a 2.9% tax levy versus a 1.8% tax levy means in terms of dollars to the taxpayer. And I really think we need to get away from looking at these percentages because they don't really do justice in terms of what dollar value this actually represents. And I just wanted to highlight this taxpayer reserve fund because I was actually quite alarmed that we ended up dipping into it by $4.3 million. It was actually a split vote, and the chair ended up voting in favor of reducing that budget from 2.9 to 1.8%. But in withdrawing the additional $4.3 million from our reserves, it brings us closer to $14.25 million in terms of the balance. So I actually spoke quite strongly against this, and I'll explain why. The Taxpayer Reserve Fund is a fund established to protect our taxpayers from significant events that can be a significant cost to the organization, and it'll result in singular year spikes in terms of the taxes that we pay. And you could argue that COVID is one of those scenarios, but we've already received funding to offset all of those costs. So I think that it's unique in that it is an unexpected event, but it's also been funded. So in comparison to other municipalities like the region, we should have closer to $50 or $60 million in this fund. If the fund was managed properly, it could help us stabilize the tax rate. Even better, if we got there, it could even provide years where we don't have a tax increase. Wouldn't that be nice, right? But I wanted to note at the beginning of the previous term of council, the fund was $30 million. Council assigned a 2% tax increase year over year, which required them to also tap into this taxpayer reserve fund. What that meant is they were offsetting the costs of the tax levy by dipping into the reserves, which essentially meant that the organization was underfunded and they had to pick up the results of that with the reserve. So today, with the budget that we approved, this reserve has now gone down to $14.25 million in the 3 years of the current term. So that means this council has drawn 3.5 times the amount of the previous council from this reserve. And I'm pointing to this because in looking at the financial health of the organization, I find this particularly worrisome. And if we're not funding the organization properly, we need to start looking at either taxing at a adequate amount or cutting services. And so far, it doesn't seem to be a will to do that, unfortunately. So what does our financial health look like? We did conduct a KPMG sustainability study, which I presented in a previous meeting, that compared the region to other similar sized municipalities. They found we were the second lowest in terms of our reserves and our reserve funds per household. That was before this year, so I don't know if we're now first, but it'd be interesting to see if that number has changed. They also found that we're the second highest in terms of long-term debt per household, and that we have the lowest capital additions as a percentage of our amortization expense. So that means we are retiring assets quicker than we are repairing them or replacing them. It doesn't paint a great picture of our financial health. And then if we look at the organization in terms of what is mandatory and what is essential, a significant aspect of the organization actually falls within this classification. So it shows that there's actually very little that we can cut, and it would fall within what's discretionary. So overall, it's a very lean organization. There isn't a lot of room for cuts, and what we know is we do top up areas. So some of this discretionary spending falls in areas that are considered within social services or community services. And these are services that I think help some of our population that experiences a great deal of financial difficulty or experiences a great deal of financial need. So I think there's an irony here in that the intent of reducing the tax rate to 1.8% was to help those in our community who need it the most as a result of the pandemic. But the areas that we may have to cut down the road actually are the ones that service that community the most. And I think help to lift people out of poverty, such as services like subsidized daycare. Like it helps people try and better their circumstances so that they can have a better financial position. So overall, I think, I think 1.8% is a great headline, but from my view, I view this a little more practical and I think a little more long-term. I think it's going to put us in a difficult position in terms of longer-term thinking, because I wonder if it's doing the organization justice in terms of our financial health. So I'm not sure if that was a bit of a downer, but that's my view on the budget. But aside from that, I wanted to let you know about a couple things that I've been doing. I was reconfirmed as the chair of the Planning and Economic Development Committee for the next 3 years, and I feel honored to have the support of my colleagues in that important role. I was also successfully elected to one of 4 positions on the CAO hiring committee. So that means Pelham will have a voice as to what leadership is going to be leading the region in terms of the CAO. I also launched a website. I have a page that helps point people to some information on COVID and where to find information on, where to get tested or where we stand in terms of what's happening with COVID right now. And I also participated in a town hall with some of my Niagara West colleagues to talk about regional issues and developments. We had about 40 people attend. I don't think we had a lot of people from Pelham attend. I might try and do it on my own next time just for a Pelham audience and hopefully have a better turnout of our residents. But I think it went really well in terms of having a variety of people speaking to regional issues and trying to I guess, bring information about the kind of things that are happening at the region. And I didn't include it in here because there was just a very recent announcement, but Swift recently announced about a $21 million investment in broadband across Niagara. I did share that information with I almost promoted you, Wayne, with Councillor Olson, because he's been asking me about broadband probably since he got his seat on council. So it will extend some broadband across Pelham, which I think is great news. And there's a service map, if you want to check it out, that shows some of the areas where that infrastructure is going to come into play. So that's a good news story for Pelham. Yeah, and as always, you know, you can reach out to me at any time if there's information that I can help provide you with. I've helped Councillor Hildebrand and Councillor Olson on a couple issues and trying to get them information or connecting them with people at the region to try and clarify some of the questions they have. I didn't speak to transit tonight. I know Councillor Hildebrand has a special interest in that, but my understanding is that the region will actually be here or at your town meeting on the February 16th, and you will have a direct opportunity to discuss the transit governance issues with them directly. So that's that. Does anyone, I know that was a lot of information. Does anyone have any questions?
Okay, thank you, Diana. And as soon as we get the screen opened up, there we go. I can now see the councillors, and I see Councillor Olson.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, and to Diana. Yes, this is a little different, getting to grumble about tax increases and things to somebody else instead of listening to it like this. But I do want to mention, of course, thank you for the information on the broadband. And we all have a special interest in transportation, which we know is coming up. I want to ask you about the, and of course, I want to mention the fact that you're on the committee for selecting the new CAO, which is an important one. But your chairmanship of the Planning and Economic Development Standing Committee. At some point, I'd like to know what kind of programs are available to the small businesses in Pelham, because there's a lot of them are suffering quite a bit right now, and we've had the benefit of the Ontario grants and things like that. But if there was anything available for our small businesses, I would certainly like to hear about them.
I actually passed a motion in our last meeting that asked to try and hold like an online session to help businesses kind of demystifying how to get online, or if you're online, how to diversify your income, or even connecting business owners or people who are interested in starting a new business now with some of the grants or the people in our community that can help connect them to those resources. So I think that will be coming shortly. I'm happy to share that information with you. It's trying to, empower our business community, but also to try and get people thinking about, if they are unemployed, maybe there's an option to start a business right now for you, and that can help fill the gap of unemployment. But it also helps, I think, create a diverse economy, right? Understanding, I mean, public health has indicated to us they expect to be dealing with COVID and COVID-related issues for the next 2 years. And what kind of impact will that have on our economy over the next 2 years? So having a resilient economy that's more connected to being online and digital opportunities, I think is very important to help cushion some of that blow from the economic impact that we're dealing with in COVID right now. But I'm happy to share that information when it becomes available.
Okay, any other questions? Oh, well, Councillor Olson, I thought you were done. Go ahead.
I also wanted to ask you, I think sometimes there's just small steps that need to be taken, and I've talked to a few people around residents, and there are quite a few people who want to have the opportunity to start a new business. And a lot of them stop right at the point where it becomes how to address the internet and how to package their product for delivery on the internet and how they advertise it. I think sometimes the costs are very small. It just depends on how fast and how much information we can give people to help them start their business. Like to design a package for internet, that's in the few thousands of dollars, not in the tens of thousands of dollars.
Mm-hmm. I actually think it could be less than that.
Yeah.
Like I used to kind of have this side business where I did some digital marketing, and it cost me very little to have my business, but it was very much service based, right? So it's so the cost really is, I mean, if you're providing a service that requires your time, the cost really is promoting yourself, right? Yeah. So, and I'm hoping that's where that digital forum or that online forum that we recently passed that's connected with our economic development department, I'm hoping that part of the role that can be part of that forum is how to demystify that and make it easier for people so they don't see it as a barrier.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Mayor, Councillor Stewart, did I see your hand up?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Ms. Hewson. You mentioned that there was a website launched where people can get information on COVID and other things. Could you give us the web address for it?
So I launched a website. It's diane.ca, and I developed a page that's specific to COVID, and it's just, there's all these different areas you go to find out information about COVID. I just tried to bring it all into one page so that it may be a little bit easier to find information. So.
Okay, and that's on your Facebook page?
Yeah, no, it's on, Marianne, I will email it to you.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I just thought you could put it out so the public could just get it right away. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Not seeing any, I will turn to the clerk.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Kaur, seconded by Councillor Hahn. Be it resolved that Council received the February 1st, 2021 report presented by Regional Councillor Hewson for information. Starting with Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink?
Yes.
Councillor Hahn?
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand?
Yes.
Councillor Kaur?
Yes.
Councillor Olson?
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that motion passes.
And again, thank you, Diana, for your presentation tonight.
I'll just take the time to say thank you, everyone. Stay safe, and I'll see you soon.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next on the agenda, 5.1, adoption of minutes. Madam Clerk.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Moved by Councillor Hildebrand, seconded by Councillor Olson. Be it resolved that the following minutes be adopted as printed, circulated, and read. C01-2021, regular council minutes of January 11th, 2021. I'd like to call for errors and omissions.
Yep. Any comments, questions on this motion? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk.
Thank you. The vote starts with Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, through you, that motion carries. Through you, Mr. Mayor, the next item on the agenda would be a request to lift consent agenda items for separate consideration.
And is there any councillors that have that would like to request to lift the consent agendas? And I see Councillor Hahn.
Yes, through the mayor. I just have a couple questions relating to the staff reports 8.3.2, the community planning report.
Okay. Just the one then? Oh.
Yeah. Is it questions or wishing to change the resolution?
Actually, just two questions.
Okay, so we don't need to lift it for that.
Okay.
Perfect.
Councillor Olson, you had a hand up?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the clerk, I'm not sure what you meant by that. I have a number of questions, but...
So generally speaking, through you, Mr. Mayor, we lift items from the consent agenda if members of council wish to make an amendment to the motions that are presented.
Okay.
But asking questions and making comments is perfectly acceptable in the consent agenda.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. Any councillor want to lift any items? Not seeing any. I'll return to the clerk.
Thank you. There are a number of items on the consent agenda, so I will go through them individually, and then members can ask their questions as we proceed. Moved by Councillor Hahn, seconded by Councillor Wink. Be it resolved that the consent agenda items listed on the February 1st, 2021 Council agenda be received and recommendations contained therein be approved as applicable. Firstly, the public meeting under the Planning Act recommendations from January 18th and the minutes also of that meeting of January 18th. We have the quarterly staff reports from the Clerk's Department for information, Community Planning Department, Corporate Services Department, Fire and Bylaw Services, Public Works Department, Recreation, Culture, and Wellness. Once we get to the end of these recommendations, we'll take questions, and we'll probably go through it in agenda order just to make it easier. The next item is the Rural Economic Development RED grant update. The treasurer does have some new information to provide council when we are at the discussion stage. And that's to receive that report for information. The Meridian Community Center ice pad status and future opportunities for information, and to approve the plan to maintain ice in both arenas for the duration of the province-wide shutdown, and that the further alternative plan to maintain ice in both arenas until June 1st to provide recreational opportunities to the public and reduce the net loss of revenue caused by the COVID-19 pandemic and provincial restrictions. There's a report reviewing the City of Burlington's public process for development applications for information. And then there were letters of support with regard to the Town of Pelham's motion regarding the 988 crisis line, supported by Fort Erie, Niagara Falls, and Port Colborne. We also received a letter from MP Tony Baldinelli with regard to the crisis line, indicating that a unanimous vote in the House of Commons favored the implementation of that 988 crisis line. There is a letter of objection to the proposed rezoning of 1522 Pelham Street submitted by C.S. Garcha. And committee minutes are the Pelham Library Board committee minutes of October 28th and November 13th of 2020. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion or questions on any of the reports.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. We will return to Councillor Hahn.
Yes, thank you, through the mayor. So under 8.3.2, community planning. So this question will be to the Director of Community Planning. Two questions. First question is a mention of the RV Anderson parking strategy. I'm just wondering, what is the time frame on the completion of that parking strategy project?
I would turn to Director of Planning for that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. So we are working with RV Anderson. They were the successful consultants in undertaking that parking strategy. They had wanted to undertake some parking usage surveys. Unfortunately, with the lockdown right now, it's not a good time to do parking counts and so forth. So that's been delaying the project somewhat. They are continuing to meet with various stakeholders and so forth. Our goal was to have the draft of the parking study completed into council in March, but I suspect it'll probably be April that we're looking at now.
Thank you. One more question. What is the status of the Kunda Park and Forest Park applications?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, through to you, to Councillor Hahn. So council will recall that on January 11th, when council dealt with a motion with respect to the Steve Bauer Trail, I had indicated that we were targeting bringing the Kunda Park and Forest Park recommendation reports to council on February 16th. As a result of council's motion, the applicants are looking at providing information to us that's affecting the timing of those reports. So those reports will not be on the agenda in February, and I don't have a date yet. We're still awaiting some responses from the applicant as it relates to the motion and how to proceed going forward. So once we have that information, I'll be able to update council.
And one more quick question. Thanks for that. And that is with regards to the old arena property. Can you give a quick status update on that? Have we received anything with regards to subdivision application yet?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. The applicant did apply to the Committee of Adjustments for some variances for the 3 lots up front on Hay Street, and those were granted, and I believe the appeal period expires at the end of this week. With respect to the remainder of the site which needs a draft plan of subdivision in order to proceed, we have not received any application to date with respect to a plan of subdivision. We're still awaiting that. We've had a pre-consultation meeting with the owner and his consultants, and they're working on putting together the appropriate material for submission of a draft plan of subdivision. But I do not have any information with respect to kind of the timing on when we might receive that.
Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hahn. So just so that we're not jumping all over the place, so let's go, any other questions for the planning director on 8.3.2 on community planning? Okay, and I see Councillor Olson.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in your report, you refer to the number of days required for processing permits. It's said to be 10 days, 15 days. Where does that arise from, that requirement?
Madam Director.
Mr. Mayor, through you, those are the requirements under the Ontario Building Code Act that require and stipulate processing times for various classifications of building permit applications.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And a further question: where do we stand on the lots on Far Street? I understand they're listed on real estate listings, and I believe as of somebody told me today that 36 out of 40 lots have already been sold there.
So, Mr. Mayor, through you, I believe you're referring to what we call those interior lots on Far Street.
I believe that's right.
Those were lots that were created by testamentary devise. And you will recall that on the lots that are on the west side of Far Street, there is a court application, and that matter is to be heard by the courts the end of March. And on the east side, we did receive also a court application to issue a building permit. The lawyers, because the issues are the same, are trying to tie those two matters together. So that's the update that I have for you. We're waiting for the matter to be heard by the courts, and that's targeted right now for the end of March.
Okay, thank you. Any more direct questions to the planning director? I just have one comment. When I look at the comparative building activity statistics from 2018 to 2020, it is absolutely amazing how well we did in the last half of last year. It's so hard to keep track of rules and regulations changes. With this lockdown as it is, can the town still process building permits? I know they can't start new construction, I believe, but can we be issuing new building permits on them, Madam Director?
Mr. Mayor, through you, so under this lockdown that we're currently in, the rules are somewhat different than when we were in the lockdown at the end of March and through April. If permits have been issued, construction can certainly continue. They do allow us to issue permits for underground work and so forth. So for site servicing and those kind of things, we can issue permits for that work. and we can issue permits for certain other types of construction if it's deemed essential. But then issuing new permits for house construction, unfortunately, we're not able to issue those. However, we do review plans that come in so that once this order gets lifted, we will be in a position to issue permits. So we are working with the development community and carrying on doing plans review. We did issue a lot of permits back in the fall, as you can see by the graph, and I think a lot of the builders were filing those permits in the fall on the understanding that we might go into a lockdown, and so they have those permits and they can continue to work. So there is no shortage of work or activity. There's the building inspection staff are very busy doing inspections given the volume of permits that have been issued.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, and so let's go to other areas here. Any councillor? I see Councillor Hildebrand.
I was still at the planning department.
Oh, okay, sorry.
To the planning department. One of the suggestions or comments I requested at the last meeting that the development charges collected, the number be included in the report. And thank you for doing that. It was $774,979 as it relates to the building departments. Can you advise council how that actually is established? Is it as simple as when you're building a house, it's so many square foot and this is what it applies to?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. So the development charges, the rates are established through our development charges bylaw. They're not necessarily based on the size of the house or the value of construction. So the development charges bylaw establishes various rates for different types of residential uses and then for non-residential uses, and then different rates in the urban area versus non-urban area because there are different growth-related costs. So a single detached or a semi-detached dwelling in Pelham in the urban area, the development charge rate is just shy of $19,000. It's $18,963. And if you're in the rural area and on septic and on a well, then the development charge is a little bit less at $14,922. And then for townhouses, it's around $13,000 in the serviced area and just over $10,000 in the rural area. And then non-residential, so that would be any commercial space or industrial space. That's based on the size of the facility, so it's based on the square footage. And again, if it's in the serviced area, it's $9.32 a square foot. And then in the rural unserviced area, it's $6.54 a square foot. So it's based on the rates that are established in the development charge study.
How often is that updated?
Every 5 years.
And when was the last update?
Our last update was 2018.
Thank you.
Now, I guess that brings a question from me, if I may, to the director. Are the regional development charges on top of these?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, through you. Those are just the town development charges. They're the regional development charges would be in addition, as well as the separate school board. They also have a development charge, which is in addition to that 774 number.
Thank you. And not wanting you to be exact, are the regional numbers approximately the same as the town numbers?
They are. I think they're just slightly less, and
Okay.
then but they're very similar.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to consent items. Any, I see Councillor Olson.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, 8.3.1 to the Clerk's Department. And information about your report. I'm gathering that the numbers under 2020, those numbers are cumulative, are they the clerk?
Through you, yes, those represent the year-end totals.
And you mentioned that COVID created some disparities, not disparities in the numbers, but perhaps anomalies in the numbers. Which one would they be? Did they?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Most specifically, they would relate to lottery licensing, issued marriage licenses, some of the services that were suspended, and some of the groups are not conducting fundraising the way they normally would in normal circumstances. So certainly those numbers were impacted. The number of marriages, the number of marriage licenses, that sort of thing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the clerk again, are there permits still open for sidewalk and patios, or is that closed at this time?
No, there is a time frame for those. They run from the spring into the fall, and we still accept applications for sidewalk permits. You may recall last year we did some enhancements allowing them to move into parking spaces to assist the restaurants. So we'll be discussing that as a senior management team as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Forward. You're welcome.
Okay. So any more questions on the clerks? Okay, no, and I see Councillor Hildebrand.
I'm moving on to Public Works, so I'm skipping over several, so you may want to go back.
No, that's fine, but as long as we hit one subject, then we can jump around. Go ahead.
Okay, to the Public Works, a couple questions. The first question actually ends up going to the treasurer. In the Public Works Department, it reported the paving of the Steve Bauer Trail. I don't recommend it ever seeing a tender or an RFQ for the paving of the Steve Bauer Trail, but we know that cost had to be near $100,000. So I'm interested to see how come council wasn't made aware of an RFQ with regards to the paving of the Steve Bauer Trail.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Mayor, that was part of the asphalt RFP. So in that RFP, there was a separate line for the Steve Bauer Trail. So it definitely was included in an RFP.
Wasn't that way before we even approved doing the Steve Bauer Trail?
No, I can pass it to the Director of Public Works. No, it wasn't. It was approved. I think there was a line there that a separate line for the Steve Bauer Trail. Like it was separate to say for consideration if we were to do it, what would it be? And it was included in there. Jason, do you want to add some more?
Sure. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. Yes, it was a request for tender. It was included as a provisional item as part of the 2020 asphalt patching and road base improvement program. That was tendered competitively and was awarded to Circle B Paving, the low price.
I was just concerned about the dates and how that all went through. But because it seems as though the Steve Bauer Trail was approved by council far after that other PO was approved.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, it definitely was tendered through the road-based program. If I recall correctly, there was an addendum put out that added that as a provisional item as part of that tender package, but it definitely was through a competitive process in accordance with our procurement policy.
Good, thank you. And further to the Public Works Director, I notice now in your report, we're back to a paid lunch. Before we were into a paid lunch, and then we, I think, had a report that no, we wanted all the workers to go back to town hall or town facilities because it was cold. They wanted to eat their lunch in the Tice Road facilities and use the washroom facilities. And now we're back to a paid lunch. Can you explain where we're at? And seems to be different messages we're getting.
Yep, of course. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Because of the pandemic and with the struggles we're facing with COVID-19 in a small facility, we are trying to limit the amount of people congregating in that building over breaks and lunch periods. So we are continuing to proceed with business by having them work through the lunch. And then once the pandemic's over, the intention is that they would be coming back to, again, the Tice facility to have their lunch in the breaks. But for now, in order to reduce the amount of people congregating in one building at one time, we're continuing on with the working from the site and lunches from the site.
Thank you. That takes care of my questions, Mr. Mayor, from Public Works.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. And I see Councillor Olson has some.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the director. On the front page of your report, you have the public service request from the public. And we learned how important that was from the Cannabis Committee earlier in the meeting. Can you have a breakdown of what the nature of the requests are? I think we talked one time about a lot of them were trees. Do you have a breakdown of how many are cannabis?
Director?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So these public service requests that are identified on this graph will be all related to public works items.
I see.
So there will be no cannabis related items on there. You're correct in that I believe you requested to have each one of by month broken down into public works groupings. We're working on that, and the next report will provide that breakdown for you.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions to Public Works? Okay, Councillor Hildebrand, I see you have your hand up. Where are we headed now?
Well, I'm just going to make a comment on 8.3.6, which is the rec and culture, and then I'm going to go on to the Meridian Community Center. On the rec, I want to thank the rec department for providing me the NRT service metrics, because that'll prove valuable when we come to the meeting with the Niagara regional reps, because all that information provides me the ridership to and from and the costs and the yearly costs. So it's an important metric, and I appreciate that information. So if I can go on to the Meridian Community Center.
Mr.
Oh, wait a minute. Wait. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Olson.
Mr. Mayor, I've got a number of questions over following the numbers on the agenda here, and I'd kind of like to get to them first, if I could.
Okay, well, what numbers are they?
8.3.3.
Okay, well, we will get to them, okay? Just, I ask, be patient. We're just going to go, Councillor Hildebrand is at 8.36. And now, Councillor, where are you headed?
I was just going to have a comment on 8.3.8, and that would conclude my comments in the section.
Okay, yep, go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
8.3.8, I agree with running the MCC during the lockdown period and keeping it running. However, there are some critical servicing that needs to be done, mainly because the original contractor that built this facility didn't fulfill his commissioning obligations to the electrical system. And that needs to be addressed. And I've passed all the information on to the acting director. So I'm just hoping that that's taken care of shortly, because it is critical that be done during this lockdown, because that's the ideal time to do this kind of work.
Okay, and perhaps you'll have a comment from Mr. Manager Cook, I guess.
Thank you, through Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I said I'm not too familiar with the commissioning of the building or the electrical systems. Is really just temporarily here momentarily, but I did receive the information from Councillor Hildebrand. We're looking at a number of initiatives and some of the suggestions that came out of the report that was provided. So we are looking at some things and hopefully get to report back some good news at some point here.
Okay, thank you.
I understand. I knew you were the acting director, and I thought Vicky might be back, and she was well aware of this stuff. So we just passed on the emails we've been sending to her on to you. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor. Okay, so any more questions relative to 8.3.6? Then we'll move on. And I see Councillor Kaur.
Yes, to the acting director of the RCW. Have we done any cost saving measures at the MCC? And I'm referring to, have we looked at any layoffs or future layoffs?
I was wondering, Ryan, are you comfortable with that, or should we go to the CAO?
I can answer some of it. I'll throw some of it back to the CAO. If that's
Okay, you start, and then we'll switch over to the CAO. Go ahead, sir.
All right. So through you, Mr. Mayor, we've been looking at. We've redeployed a number of staff from the MCC out into the Public Works Department to perform some needed services outside of the facility. Some of the other our full-time facility staff are maintaining the actual inside the facility itself. It did take an awful lot of people through it in the last 3 months of the year. We had like 60,000 people come through the building, so it did take a little bit of wear and tear, and we are working at those, working on some of those repairs and fixes. From a cost savings perspective, our energy use has been dropped. I think it's right around 45% from where we were in this time last year. So, and that's really, when you don't have use on the ice, you can really start to reduce the use of the refrigeration plant. So instead of running the plant most of the day with multiple floods and shaving and ice repairs, we don't touch it. It basically is in situ right now. So the only thing we have to be aware of is the temperature between the actual concrete ices and the ice. So we're just trying to maintain the right temperature and the right amount of refrigeration to not break that bond. So that's been highly reduced. So it really isn't costing us a lot of money to keep that up.
Thank you, sir. Let's go to the CAO, perhaps for a general overall picture.
The town of Pelham has 8 staff on layoff. All are normally employed in RCW. RCW staff are working, have been seconded to Public Works. They've also been seconded to Planning and Building. We have staff members working on a scanning project, which is digitizing records, but most particularly site plans and sort of large map-like ones. Last week I walked upstairs to sort of check in and see how that was going, and I asked one of the staff who seconded what the oldest document was she'd scanned over, and she said 1970. This is the point where I point out I wasn't born yet. But those are 50-year-old documents that are finally being brought into a modern searchable format. So we have staff seconded to a number of different roles. We're having some interaction with the region of Niagara, which is asking all of its member municipalities to see if they have staff who can be temporarily ported over to support the region, both at public health and in long-term care, critical areas. For it, and it's having staff issues, of course, during a pandemic. And then, of course, we continue to clamp down on virtually all discretionary spending, and our utilities usage are down dramatically. So we have a number of operational savings.
Thank you for that, sir. Back to you, Councillor Corr.
Yes, one final question to the acting director or the CEO. When we get back to running the arena, are we going to be charging outside residents a surplus for the rental of the arena? I understand other municipalities are taking their ice out, and I don't think it'd be fair that other municipalities are using our facilities without being charged an extra fee.
Maybe let's, Mr. CAO.
Well, there is a report on the agenda this evening where we are seeking your permission both to keep the ice in or on, I'm never really sure which word we use, to keep the ice there on both pads, and thereafter to operate both facilities using the model we engaged with last year. While there's no guarantee of success this year, it was extremely successful and lucrative for the municipality to do so, and of course protected employment for town staff in addition thereto. And so we are this evening asking your permission to adopt last year's strategy this year.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Corr?
I don't know if that answered my question. Are we charging a premium for people outside of Pelham for renting the ice?
Let Mr. Cook answer that.
Okay, Mr. Cook?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't think we've looked at charging a premium to outside renters. We do have our facilities allocation policy that we currently use to make sure that we're renting to Pelham communities members first, but haven't looked at. Plus, we do have to somewhat stay within our health unit as well, so we haven't looked at that yet.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any more questions on the 8.36? Okay, now Councilor Olson, where you want to go?
I want to go back to and finish 8.35. And
Go
I
ahead,
have
sir.
a couple of questions here, and relates to the stormwater ponds.
Okay.
And the asset management program, and the fact that I read in one report that we've hired an analyst for this. And my question is to the Director of Public Works. I'm assuming, that when you have your inventory of the stormwater ponds and you've evaluated all the risks associated with it, the maintenance risks and the maintenance programs that go along with it, that they will appear on the asset management program. Is that correct?
Mr. Director?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is correct. Stormwater management ponds will be included as part of our asset management plan moving forward.
Councilor?
Thank you. And further through you, Mr. Mayor, and that would include an annual budget for maintenance and rehabilitation, remediation, that type of thing?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So again, that's correct. Currently, we've just undertaken a report that identified what stormwater management ponds facilities we own and operate, and there are various maintenance activities that are required to keep them operating properly. We're going to look at expanding that database with that information, and then come forward with a forecast, just like we do our roads department. It'll probably be part of the roads capital budget with a maintenance forecast moving forward, so that we can plan for those projects and get those done at appropriate times.
Councilor?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. And the date for that, I believe you've told me in the past, is June that that report will be finished. Is that approximately right?
July. It's through you, Mr. Mayor. It's July the 1st.
July the 1st. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Councilor, Council, any other questions on any of the consent agenda items? Councilor Hahn.
Through the mayor, yeah. So a question for the treasurer. I just wanted to know, our contract with Deloitte for our audit, that's, I believe, a 5-year contract. When is that due?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we're going out for audit services in March of this year. So it expires this year.
Okay, good. So very timely, just because, and I think I had passed this along to her, if I didn't, I meant to. Yes. Similar to Welland. Welland has gone out to MNP, and they found substantial savings using that organization, like very substantial savings. So I just want to make sure that we're going to be looking at them as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Olson?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, back to 8.3.6. There's a report on NRT on-demand service. And I'm looking for a comment with regards to disabled transit. I think I asked before how many rides were for disabled persons, and I was given an answer. It appears to me it's 0, if I'm not mistaken.
Mr. Cook, is that your department? Not really anymore.
Yeah, maybe.
I'm sorry? Go ahead, Mr. Ryan. Do you have that figure in front of you?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, it does look like that is there were no wheelchair accessible vehicle trips. I honestly don't know if there is an issue with the NRT program, or if it's there's trouble with getting these vehicles, I don't have a lot of, honestly don't have a lot of.
Councillor Olson?
Through you again, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Cook. I believe the answer the last time was there was a disappointment in the number of people that were taking the transit, disabled persons taking transit. Now, looking at the trip rating report there right beside it, does that say that, I'm assuming that report says that most of the people regard the service as excellent there, is that right? Because it looks like a 1 to 5 scale, 5 being the best, and it appears that might be the way that works.
Mr. Ryan, do you know?
Mr. Mayor, I'm not entirely sure how they come to get that metric, but yes, that does appear to be what you described.
Yeah, thank you. Ryan is agreeing with you on that, Mr. Councillor Olson, that's what it appears like. Everyone is, most people are satisfied with the service.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and continuing my question, I'd like to notice there's a circle down at the bottom that doesn't quite jive with the line charts on the left-hand side, and it says 49% of the rides are intra community and 51 are inter. But on the top it says rides by origin municipality. Most of them are originating in Pelham, and the destination by municipality, most of them are destined for place in Pelham. So that suggests to me that most of the rides are internal, but I don't understand how at the bottom there it could be 49 and 51.
Mr. Cook, any explanation that you can see?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, this information is packaged up to us by the NRT program and provided through the region. So if I can look into why that isn't lining up or seemingly lining up, try to sort this.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Olson?
Thank you, Mr. Cook. I'd appreciate it if we could have an answer to that, because it's a little bit confusing. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Hildebrand?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I wasn't really going to get into the NRT service because there's a lot of details that I've come up with. But in general, the residential complaints that I get, the service is good for people that have cell phones with data and use the app. The service is not acceptable for people that try and use the telephone service. And it ends up them being lost because it's taken an hour to at least contact the service provider. So that's the residents' complaints on getting back to me.
Okay, and I will remind...
We'll deal with that the 16th.
Yep, and I will remind council, we will have the transportation people in here on the 16th, so we will be able to give them our feedback from the citizens. Excellent. Any other items on the consent agenda? Madame Clerk, I turn to you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the treasurer does have an update to provide on agenda item 8.3.7.
Okay, and we turn to the treasurer, please.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. The report that was submitted, this is an update that the actual grant that we submitted is not the same. The guidance that we received did change, so they didn't allow the bike lanes that were paved. So we resubmitted with wayfinding of $50,000, and so that's what the red grant has been submitted for. We are submitting for $200,000 for the cycling grant that the region has. So that's where we're going to make up the difference of this grant here. So I just wanted to provide an update that when this report was written, it was written with the intent of including the bike lanes that were part of the Pelham Street project. And when I spoke to the person at the ministry, they said it was fine. And then when I reconfirmed, it wasn't. So right now, the submission is $50,000 for the wayfinding sign, of which 30% is could be funded by the red grant. And then we have $10,000 in the 2021 budget that we can put towards this, and then $25,000 would come out of the reserves from some of the surpluses coming this year. This is an important initiative from the Active Transportation Committee to update the wayfinding sign, and it's something that this grant specifically funds. So I just wanted to provide that update, and also that the new cycling grant application just came out from the region, and we're going to be applying for $200,000 to cover the bike lanes that we would have had in the red grant.
Excellent. Thank you for that information. Any comments on the treasurer's comments? Okay, thank you. We look to successful applications on those grants. Madam Clerk?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, the vote starts with Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand?
Yes.
Councillor Kaur?
Yes.
Councillor Olson?
Yes.
Councillor Stewart?
Yes.
Councillor Wink?
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, that motion is carried. Through you, Mr. Mayor, the next item on the agenda, I just want to double check my electronic agenda here. Is the item 10.2.1, assumption of residences at Lookout Subdivision, moved by Councillor Hildebrand, seconded by Councillor Olson. Be it resolved that Council receive Report 2020-0028, assumption of residences at Lookout Subdivision, and that Council assume the municipal services in residence at Lookout Subdivision and open the streets within the subdivision as public highways by bylaw in accordance with the subdivision agreement. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Okay, any questions or comments on this motion? Councillor Hildebrand?
I will make a motion to defer approval until the as-built drawings are provided to council at a future meeting.
And Madam Clerk, on a motion of deferral?
So I was just waiting to hear if there was any discussion. Before that, I was aware that the councillor wanted to bring that.
Okay. Any discussion from the rest of council on this deferral?
So firstly, on the deferral, we need a seconder.
Yes.
And that staff be directed to bring the report back to council for consideration once the drawings have been made available. But we do
Okay.
need a seconder on that.
So first, we need a seconder on the deferral, and I see Councillor Kaur will second it. Again, any discussion by any members of council? Councillor Olson?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and what are the documents that we're looking for, the drawings we're looking for in this case?
Yes. Councillor Hildebrand?
Exactly. I'm looking for the as-built drawings, Councillor Olson. The drawings provided are not as-built drawings that were provided in the council package.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I guess maybe I shouldn't, I'm not meaning to put you on the spot, Madam Director of Planning. Any comments on that or not?
Mr. Mayor, through you, this report was prepared by the Director of Public Works. I understand we do have the as-built drawings, so not wanting to speak for the director,
Okay.
I'm sure he'll get a report back on fairly quickly.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, go ahead, Director of Public Works.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Staff have received the as-built drawings. They were reviewed as part of the assumption process, and based on the information that we received in those as-built drawings, that's where the recommendation comes to council for assumption.
Okay.
The drawing that was submitted as part of the report was the general site servicing plan. It's the 2013 plan that was submitted part of the application prior to starting the subdivision. We are in receipt of the as-built drawings, which were completed in 2014, following the installation of the site servicing and the sidewalks. So that report, or this report, will come back to council on the February 16th date with the proper drawing attached.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Madam Clerk?
You have Councillor Hahn with her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Councillor Hahn.
Thank you. Through the mayor. With regard to this, there's a stormwater management pond, I believe, that we would be assuming as well, correct? In this, it's, I believe, in the drawing.
Director of Public Works?
Correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
So earlier we were talking about a consultant has been hired to review, or there's going to be a review with regards to stormwater management ponds for the town, those that we own, and some other work that's going to be done. Should we not be kind of crossing our T's or dotting our I's before we assume something? Should we kind of making sure that's done first before we assume that? In other words, make sure that there's nothing wrong with it, there's no fault with it before we assume that pond?
Back to you, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, we do several inspections throughout the assumption process. Inspecting the stormwater management facility that has been built in accordance with the intended design is something that engineering checks. As well, we walk the site with the developers to look at sidewalks, landscaping works prior to final assumption. In this particular instance, the subdivision was completed in 2014. Most recently, the warranty period has expired. There were a number of deficiencies which the developer was required to repair. Those were repaired in December of 2020 into early January, and based on the inspections by engineering staff following those deficiency repairs, we're satisfied and ready to assume the subdivision. So those inspections and checks have been are in place.
Councillor? Okay. So in a normal process of things, and just so I can get this right, Director, Public Works, so your engineering department has gone through the checklist and multiple checklists, obviously, and you viewed this drawing. That is a technical drawing, I take it, for lack of a better word, and your department is happy, content that everything is up to snuff?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. So the assumption process, it's a long process. We, as engineering staff, we will accept primary services. So there's a number of securities that are held against the project from the developer. Those are released at certain times in the process. So basically, engineering staff will do a inspection once the primary services are complete, which is the storm sewer, sanitary sewer, stormwater management pond, any of the underground infrastructure, as well as curbs, base asphalt. Final assumption, there's an inspection completed once the final works are completed, when the subdivision is built out, and the final landscaping, sidewalks, final course paving are completed. So there's a second inspection that's completed for the final assumption. So yes, to answer your question, we do rely on third-party engineering to submit plans, which are as-built drawings, which show that the subdivisions have been completed and constructed in accordance with the original intent and the original plans that were submitted and reviewed at the time of the engineering review. So there are a number of checks and balances, and in this case, yes, we're satisfied that the subdivision has been, developers met all their requirements on this particular development.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Any other questions on the motion? Not seeing any. I'll turn to the clerk.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, this is on the motion to the consideration of agenda item 10.2.1, assumption of residences at Lookout subdivision be postponed pending receipt of the associated as-built drawings, and that staff be directed to bring the report back to council for consideration once the said drawings have been made available. So this is on the motion amendment by Councillors Hildebrand and Kaur. I'll start the vote with Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur?
Yes.
Councillor Olson?
No.
Councillor Stewart?
Yes.
Councillor Wink?
Yes.
Councillor Hahn?
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin?
No.
The motion does carry. So the next item on the agenda is the Park Lane right-of-way land exchange. Moved by Councillor Stewart, seconded by Councillor Wink. Be it resolved that Council receive Report 2021-0031 and that Council direct staff to undertake the preparation of the necessary easement agreement in perpetuity for the exclusive use of 4 parking spaces on Park Lane by the owner of 9 Highway 20 West in exchange for land dedication to the town to improve the Park Lane right-of-way. And that staff be directed to prepare the necessary bylaw to declare the lands associated with the 4 parking spaces surplus to the needs of the town when the necessary reference plan is prepared, and that Council directs staff to work with the owner of 9 Highway 20 West to facilitate the transfer of 27 square meters of land to the town and the preparation of the necessary reference plan, and that the owner of 9 Highway 20 West is responsible for the legal and surveying costs associated with this land exchange. To you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Before I turn this to council, I'd just like to say that this developer, he lives in Fenwick. He's a resident of the town. He's more or less a one-man. Him and his family are the ones that have purchased his property. He's also the developer, for lack of a better word, that owns the property on the northeast corner of Highway 20 and Pelham Street. He fixed that building up tremendously. It's an asset to the town. And before I go to council, I'll ask the director of planning. Any comments on this submission, director?
Mr. Mayor, through you. Yes, this is something that certainly staff have been working on for a bit. We dealt with the property owner parking last year and trying to improve the right of way for Park Lane and the past access to one of our main cultural assets, which is Marlene Stewart Street Park. So we've been now working with the owner on the other side, and so the proposal is that we'll retain or obtain again another strip of land along Park Lane in exchange for exclusive use of 4 parking.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Olson?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move an amendment to the motion and make it so that the 50% of the costs are borne by the town and 50% of the costs, legal and surveying costs, are borne by the owner.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. Is there a mover to this motion amendment? And I don't see a seconder to that amendment, Councillor. Then we just continue with discussion.
Yes.
Yeah. So no, that amendment doesn't pass. Any other comments, questions on this report? Not seeing any. Okay, not seeing any, Madam Clerk.
Thank you. This vote. Sorry. Thank you. This vote starts with Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
That motion carries. Through Mr. Mayor, the next staff report, moved by Councillor Hahn, seconded by Councillor Hildebrand. Be it resolved that Council receive Report 2021-0035 Corporate Services and that Council approve the special pre-authorized property taxes COVID-19 payment plan for 2021 in order to offer flexibility for taxpayers facing financial challenges due to the pandemic. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Thank you. Perhaps I'll turn to the treasurer first. Did we end up the year with the same, more or less, arrear in property tax? Do you have those figures? Oh, I'm sorry, you're on mute, perhaps?
Okay, is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, our outstanding accounts receivable are a little bit higher than the prior year, I think by 2%. This payment plan, I think what's good about this payment plan is that it looks at, there's about 175 residents that are in arrears, that they wouldn't have been in arrears as of February of last year. So this is to help them out to pay their arrears and then also their 2021 balance by making 10 monthly payments that are pre-authorized. So this has been successful in the city of Niagara Falls and St. Catharines, and we thought that it would be helpful to for these residents, these property owners, if we can help them out as well. That way they won't be incurring any more interest or penalties on their outstanding 2020 balance. Anyone that has a balance prior to February 28th of 2020, old arrears, they don't qualify for this payment plan. This is just for someone that has incurred this financial hardship because of COVID.
Excellent. Thank you for that explanation. Any questions to the treasurer? Not seeing any. I guess we're good, Madam Clerk.
Thank you. Through you, this vote starts with Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
And that motion carries. Mr. Mayor, the next item on the agenda is item 10.2.4, moved by Councillor Kaur, seconded by Councillor Stewart. Be it resolved that Council receive Report 2021-0009 Offsite Work Arrangements Policy, and that Council approve the Offsite Work Arrangements Policy.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And perhaps I will again realize these reports are all very well put together, but sometimes it's nice to have a verbal comment on them. So I'd like to have the CAO give a small background on this, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Council, I attended remotely, two legal conferences between November and December of last year, both around sort of labor and employment law. And at both, there were speakers who really pushed the point that it's critical to have one of these policies in place if you're an employer who's having staff work remotely, based on what I thought were compelling arguments and good legal advice. We went forward to try to formalize, and so the policy attached here is one that's been cobbled together from a couple of other public sector organizations. We aren't the first to crossing the line here, but and we are, in fact, we do have a number of staff who are doing this sort of work. So this will apply and govern those relationships. And the best advice I can give you is that it's a pragmatic legal requirement.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. CAO. Any questions, comments on this report now? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk.
So this vote starts with Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
For you, Mr. Mayor, the motion carries. Through you, Mr. Mayor, the next item on the agenda, 10.2.5, moved by Councillor Wink, seconded by Councillor Olson. Be it resolved that Council receive Report 2021-0001, Consideration of Procedure Bylaw Amendment, Proxy Appointments for Absent Council Members, Bill 197, and that Council not proceed with any form of proxy voting. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Any comments, questions on this? Councillor Hildebrand.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I will be making a motion to defer this to a future council meeting, possibly in the second quarter of 2021, pending receipt of further additional information. For example, other regional municipalities' position on proxy voting.
Okay, is there a seconder for this? And I see Councillor Stewart. Okay, any comments, questions on the deferral? Councillor Olson.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. My comments on the motion are, this is a very well-written report, very complete, and I will be voting against anything anyway that says anything to do with proxies, because I was elected to be here in my place and make sure I represent the residents of Pelham, and I don't feel that this is a very democratic way of doing business. First of all, it's a decision that's made before any kind of debates or ideas or discussion, and proxies I don't think are a transparent or democratic way of conducting our business.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hildebrand.
Here you, Mr. Mayor. The office of our MPP, our local MPP, has been in contact with me, realizing we're voting on this situation. So there's a lot of background information I've been gathering, and I've been having discussions with them, and they considered an important item. And I don't want to just rush into and make an important decision to say no until I get everything on my table. And it is very complex, I agree. I'm not disagreeing that the motion isn't written well. I think the clerk has done an excellent job, but I think we need more time before we make a final decision.
Okay, and Councillor, I believe you put a time frame on that, did you?
Yeah, the second quarter of 2021.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wink?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, so I'm going to agree with Councillor Olson on this one. I think we've got enough information here that we can make a decision. Proxy voting, I put it out to each and every one of you that there are certain times that we debate issues, and I know for myself, based on that debate, that I've changed my vote. I don't come into a decision without listening to all sides of the argument, and the fact that a proxy vote is given to someone to throw that out on the floor without being privy to that debate, I think is totally against the democratic process.
Okay. Thank you for that, Councillor. Councillor Stewart. Sorry.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I believe that proxy voting does have a place. It's not meant to supersede your attendance at meetings. It's not, it's like, oh, I don't feel like coming today, do the voting for me. But I think it should only be able to be used in extenuating circumstances. For example, Councillor Hildebrand recently lost a member of his family, and he wasn't able to be at the meeting when it came up, and he had done extensive research and was not able to participate. And further issues could be someone being hospitalized unexpectedly. So I think we need to have proxy voting in place, but we need to have parameters set for how and when it can be used. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor. Any other comments? Not seeing any. I will put my own 2 cents in. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Councillor Hahn, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I would agree with Councillor Stewart. I think that there's a time and a place for it. I think it would be in extenuating circumstances, and that in fact was discussed in this this very thorough report from the clerk. So I think that there has to be some very strict parameters for the usage of this, but I think that is something that per Councillor Hildebrand's position of deferring this, that's something we need to look further into, is what would be those extenuating circumstances. Councillor Stewart just gave a couple examples, and I'm sure there's probably others, but there have to be some tight parameters around it. It can't just be for willy-nilly deciding not to show up one day. I don't agree with that either.
Okay, thank you. Now I'll put my 2 cents in, and I agree with both Councillor Olson and Councillor Wink. I believe that when we're elected by our residents, by our constituents, that they want us in the council chambers. I realize that we all have situations arise in our personal lives and we can't make it. That's why we have 7 people on this council, and why we have a quorum based on 4. So myself, I would never vote for proxy voting. I don't think there is a place in it in the democracy, and that's just my standing on it. Anyway, Madam Clerk.
Thank you. Through Mr. Mayor, the motion on the floor is the motion to postpone, and that was by Councillor Hildebrand, and I just need to get back up, and seconded by Councillor Stewart. That consideration of agenda item 10.2.5, procedure bylaw amendment regarding proxy voting for absent members, municipal council members, be postponed until the second quarter of 2021 pending receipt of additional information, and that staff be directed to bring the matter back to council for consideration once said additional information is available. So just to be clear, it's my understanding that the additional information requested is with regard to what parameters council is interested in for proxy voting. I just need clarity on what the additional information is.
Councillor Hildebrand, could you, the clerk needs some clarity?
Yeah, I'd like clarity on what the other municipalities are done and what the exact parameters will be, so we know exactly what we're voting for.
Madam Clerk.
Thank you. So the vote will start with Councillor Wink.
No.
I'm sorry, no?
No.
Thank you. Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson. Councillor Olson.
No.
Sorry, no.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
No.
The motion does carry. The next item on the agenda, through Mr. Mayor, moved by Councillor Kaur, seconded by Councillor Hildebrand. Be it resolved that Council receive Report 2021-0016 Corporate Services, and that the timing of development charge calculation, installment, and interest policy for the purposes of Section 26.1 and 26.2 of the Development Charges Act, as included in Appendix 1, be approved. That the Development Charges Bylaw 4023 of 2018 be amended to reflect the new Sections 26.1 and 26.2, and that a $550 administrative fee for payment defaults under Section 26.1 of the Development Charges Act be approved for inclusion in the 2021 Fees and Charges Bylaw. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Okay, I will probably, let's turn it over to council, and if you have any questions to ask the director, please do. Go ahead, Councillor Hildebrand.
Through you to the treasurer. I understand it just applied to nonprofit and institutional, and the development charges stay the same for all the other applicants. Is that correct?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, what the new section for 26.1 and 26.2, it doesn't apply to the rates. The rates don't change. What it applies to is that now the actual payment of the development charges are in installments. So currently when the developers are paying for the development charges, they pay it all at one time. But for the two specific areas, 26.1, institutional developments and rental housing that is not for profit, they can pay over 6 annual installments, and non-for-profit housing has 21 annual installments. So that is what's new. The rates don't change. So because of that, we had to establish a policy that, that updates that new information, that updates the new act, the two sections of the act. So what this is reflecting the 26.1, 26.2 of the new Development Charges Act. And we're following what the Niagara region is doing.
Councilor Hildebrand?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I see Councilor Hahn.
Yes, through the mayor to the treasurer. So with regard to that, just out of curiosity, do we have any projects right now that fall into either of those two categories, the not-for-profit or the institutional?
No.
And it's been some time, I'm guessing, since we have.
Yeah, no, we don't.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Not seeing anyone, I would put it to the clerk.
Thank you. Through Mr. Mayor, this vote starts with Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that motion carries. The next item on the agenda, moved by Councillor Hahn, seconded by Councillor Stewart. Be it resolved that Council receive report 2021-0020 and that the firefighter return to service policy be presented to Council for approval at their next regular meeting.
Okay. Any discussion, comments on this report? Not seeing any. I will turn to the clerk.
This vote starts with Councillor Hildebrand, please.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, that motion carries. The next item, be it resolved that Council receive report 2021-0019 and that the policy for fire leave of absence be presented for approval at the next regular meeting of Council, and that's on a motion by Councillor Wink, seconded by Councillor Olson.
Okay. Comments or questions on this motion? Not seeing any. I turn to the clerk.
And this vote starts with Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the motion carries. The next item on the agenda, 10.2.9, moved by Councillor Kaur, seconded by Councillor Hahn. Be it resolved that Council receive report 2021-0021 and that the policy for hiring of firefighters with previous experience be presented for approval at the next regular meeting of Council.
Thank you. Any comments or questions on this? Not seeing any. I turn to the clerk.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, the vote will start with Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
That motion is carried. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Check my agenda. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. The next item of business on the agenda as listed is the presentation and consideration of bylaws, moved by Councillor Stewart, seconded by Councillor Hildebrand. Be it resolved that the Council of the Town of Pelham, having given due consideration to the following bylaws, do now read a first, second, and third time and do pass same, and that the Mayor and Clerk be and are hereby authorized to sign and seal the bylaws. Bylaw 4310, being a bylaw to authorize the Mayor and the Clerk to enter into a transfer payment agreement with Her Majesty the Queen and Right of the Province of Ontario, as represented by the Minister of Transportation for the Province of Ontario, for the purposes of implementation of the Municipal Transit Enhanced Cleaning. Bylaw 4312, 2021, being a bylaw authorizing the borrowing of money to meet current expenditures of the Council of the Corporation of the Town of Pelham, and to repeal and replace Bylaw 4225 of 2020, being a bylaw authorizing borrowing. Bylaw 4313, 2021, being a bylaw to establish a reserve fund for volunteer firefighters' life insurance. And Bylaw 4314 of 2021, being a bylaw to amend Bylaw 4023 of 2018, being a bylaw for the imposition of development charges. To you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. Any questions on any of these bylaws? Councillor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Treasurer, with regards to this bylaw 4310, 2021, with regards to the payments, I think that's the one with regards to the cleaning services. I hope I have the right bylaw there.
Yeah, that's the one.
4310, 2021. Can you please explain that to me?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this is a grant that we received to help offset COVID expenditures relating to cleaning the buses. So this is from the period of March of 2020 to August 16th of 2020, the period that the town was running the buses. So it's about $6,700, and we just need a transfer payment agreement in order for us to get that money. So it was the cleaning cost.
Okay, so thank you. So it's basically just approval for a policy for us to get the grant money into our account.
Right. We need a bylaw to get this. Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Well, that's a good bylaw. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments, questions? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Let's start the vote with Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the motion carries. Oh, there is no closed session. Mr. Mayor, moved by Councillor Hildebrand, seconded by Councillor Hahn. Be it resolved that the following bylaw be read a first, second, and third time and passed. Bylaw 4316 of 2021 to adopt, ratify, and confirm the proceedings of Council for the Town of Pelham at its regular meeting held on the first day of February 2021. Starting with Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
You, Mr. Mayor, the motion passes. The final motion for the evening. Moved by Councillor Wink, seconded by Councillor Hildebrand. Be it resolved that this regular meeting of Council be adjourned until the next regular meeting scheduled for February 16th, 2021 at 5:30 p.m.
Any comments?
The vote starts with Councillor Olson.
Don't see any comments.
No comments. Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
That motion carries through you, Mr. Mayor.
We're done?
The gavel is yours.
Okay. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
All right. There you go.